Tonight I'm trying something new. That's right, I'm going to recreate, by popular request, a session I did at a recent homeschool conference in Nashville, Tennessee. So I hope you'll enjoy the next session where I cover 3 constitutional myths next on the Constitution Study Live.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study Live this nice Wednesday night. I'm glad you could join me. I hope you'll head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. That has everything Constitution Study, events, videos, audios, articles. Tonight, being this is a live broadcast, head over to facebook.com/Constitution Study. Ask your questions all through the event. I will be reviewing those later tonight as we get to the end. As I get to the end of my session, I'll be trying to answer any questions I can in the time that we have left. I will tell you this may be a little rough. I've had some technical issues trying to get the applications to all work so that I could actually have the presentation I use pop up and look good for you guys. So hopefully this will work. We'll find out. Leave me a comment. Let me know. I have another one next month. I'm planning on doing the other session I was going to do in Nashville, again, by popular demand. I want to thank those who've been supporting the work that we're doing here, especially sites like Restore the Intent and Conversations on the Culture, the Constitutional Grassroots Movement. All have been very helpful. I want to thank those that have been supporting the work that we're doing. And now, because this is a fairly busy event, let's get right with it. And let's start with 3 constitutional myths. Now, this may take just a second to get this to come up the way I want it. So if it looks a little weird, I apologize. But hopefully, now you're seeing my banner on the 3 constitutional myths. So I normally started this out with a little game. Kind of a way to get people engaged, where I ask a question that has 5 answers, and I ask the group to see how many answers they could come up with. So I'm going to ask the question, see how many of the answers you can come up with, and then let me know in the chat. Let's see how well you did. What I'd like you to do is name a freedom protected by the First Amendment. There are 5 of them. So go ahead, see if you can name them. I'll give you just a minute. I promise not to do the Jeopardy Think music. That's probably copyrighted. All right, do you think you've got them all? All right, let's see. Number 1 is freedom of religion. Number 2 is freedom of speech. Number 3 is freedom of the press. Number 4 is freedom to peaceably assemble. And number 5 is the freedom to petition for a redress of grievances. See, those of you who've been following the Constitution Study may remember that part of how this all started with this was the State of the First Amendment survey. This is where I got the idea to actually study the Constitution the way we do. Now, the 2018 report, the last report I have access to, 77% of those surveyed supported the First Amendment, which I think, well, all right, that's pretty good news. I think the fact that 23% don't say they support the First Amendment may be a little disenchanting. But what really bothers me is 40% could not name a single freedom protected by the First Amendment. Think about that. 2/5 of those surveyed could not name a single freedom protected by the First Amendment. And another 36%, almost the same, could only name one. In fact, of the over 1,000 people that were surveyed, only one could name all 5 freedoms. And it dumbfounds me that while 3/4 of Americans support the First Amendment, almost the same number know little, if anything, about it. And that was the catalyst. That was what brought the Constitution Study idea to mind, was hearing the results of previous annual surveys. And as I've studied the Constitution for myself, as I've read it and as I've taught it to others, I found there's a lot of things about the Constitution that we know that just isn't true. So I want to take some time tonight, and I want to look at 3 of these particular myths. I think all 3 of these are important. I think they're all pretty universal. Almost everybody believes these 3 things are true. In fact, you'll hear them a lot. You've been taught these things. You'll hear it in news programs. You'll read it in news articles. They're very common. So let's jump right in and take a look at some of them. So myth number 1, true or false, the federal government is made up of 3 co-equal branches. Now think about that for a second. Most people have an answer by now. The answer is false. Yes, the federal government has 3 branches, but they are not equal. And because this is the Constitution study, I'll prove it. So first, let's look at what are called delegated powers. The first 3 articles of the Constitution create those 3 branches of government that we talk about: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Makes sense. However, it also those 3 articles also list the powers delegated to those 3 branches, at least most of them. So let's look at them. So the legislative branch is created by Article 1. It establishes Congress, both our House of Representatives and our Senate. And that's a very interesting discussion we go forth, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. And in Section 8, you'll see most of the powers that have been delegated to the legislature. There are 25 of them in all. And some people count them a little different, whether they go with the bullet points or with the individual, about 25. If you look, there's about 4 more powers listed in Article 2, and there's one tiny last little power delegated in Article 5. So altogether, there are 30 specific enumerated powers given directly and exclusively to our legislative branch of government. Okay? So let's look at the executive branch. So Article 2 creates the presidency. All executive power is vested in the presidency. And if you look at sections 2 and 3, there are a total of about 10 powers delegated to the president. These are not powers delegated to Congress. They're delegated to the president. But there's something very interesting. You see, of those 10 powers, the 3 most powerful, that of making appointments, signing treaties, and that of commander-in-chief, require the assistance of Congress. The president appoints federal officers and judges with the advice and consent of the Senate, part of Congress. The president signs treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate, part of Congress. And yes, the president is the commander-in-chief. However, it is Congress that makes the rules for the military. And if you look at the 7 remaining powers, they're mostly administrative and ceremonial. They're things like receiving ambassadors or calling a joint session of Congress. Not really, they're limited powers. They're about administering parts of government. Now, Article 3 creates the judicial branch, and it delegates to them one and only one power. You know what that is? Trying cases. The ability to take a case that's brought before them, review the facts, and issue an opinion. That's it. There's nothing more. They do not have the power to settle law. They do not have the power to enforce their opinion. They don't even have the power to determine their own size and scope. Congress determines the size of the judicial branch and the scope of its powers. In short, the judicial branch has no real power at all. And in fact, Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78 said they are to say to have neither force nor will, only judgment. So, okay, maybe numbers aren't your thing. Maybe you're not convinced by numbers. Well, let's take a look at it this way. How many of you have had or are a boss? Are all familiar with bosses? Well, what distinguishes a boss? What can a boss do that others cannot do? Well, a boss has the authority to tell others what to do. Your boss tells you what to do. If you're a boss, you tell others what to do. And they have the power to fire those who don't do their job. Right? It's a very simplistic definition. But for what we're talking about here, it works really well. So let's look at the offices. So president. Who can tell the president what to do? Well, Congress does to some extent. We have the separation of powers, but it's Congress that determines the rules for the military, of which the president is commander-in-chief. It is the Senate's advice and consent that are needed to appoint officials and to sign treaties. And Congress can pass a law that binds the president. Sure, yes, the sitting president can veto any bill, but Congress can override that veto, and if they do, it's law, and the president is required to execute that law. Now, you may be saying, wait, Paul, we're told that a president has prosecutorial discretion. What is this phrase? Well, meaning that the president gets to decide which laws to enforce and which not to. We see this more in the prosecution of the district attorneys and prosecutors deciding what cases they're going to actually prosecute. And they extend it to the president. He has the authority to say, no, I'm not going to enforce that law. There's just one problem. That's not entirely true. You see, if Congress passes a law, the president is required to faithfully execute that law. He swears an oath to faithfully execute the office of president. His office is endowed with executive powers, the power to execute law. The one caveat on that is he isn't required to execute a law unless it violates the Constitution, which is the supreme law. So if Congress passes a law that is unconstitutional, the president is not required, is not bound to that law. But if Congress passes a law that is constitutional, he's required to follow it and execute it. Well, what about judges? You see, Congress determines the size of the Supreme Court. In fact, the only constitutional requirement for a Supreme Court is that there be a Chief Justice in case the president gets impeached. The Chief Justice sits over the trial in the Senate. That's it. Congress determines what other federal courts exist, all the inferior courts, the lower courts, the district courts, the federal circuit courts. The Congress determines which ones exist. Congress determines how large they are, those courts. They even get to determine what cases they can hear. And judges are bound to follow any federal law passed by Congress as long as it's not a violation of the Constitution. Now, that's a whole other discussion. We can go into a real rabbit hole with judges and following that. But let's go on to the third branch of government, Congress. Can either the executive or judicial branches tell Congress what to do? No, they can't. The only power the president has over Congress is to call a joint session under unusual circumstances. December 7th, 1941, the president called a joint session of Congress. That's it. He couldn't make them do anything. He just said, I'm calling a session. And the president gets to settle a dispute if the two houses can't agree on when to go into recess. Never been used to my knowledge. And no judge has the authority to order Congress to do anything. Well, what if, the other part of being a boss is not simply telling you what to do, but the power to fire? You see, only Congress can remove a president or other sitting federal officer. It's through the impeachment process. Only Congress can remove a federal judge. But who can remove a sitting congressman before their term ends? The answer? Well, pretty much only the House they're a member of. Meaning, a member of the House can only be removed if the House of Representatives votes to remove them. And the same for a senator. A senator can only be removed if the Senate votes to remove them. Now, technically, a congressman can be impeached. But since that has to go through both houses, that's kind of like making extra work that doesn't mean anything. Why would a senator ask the House to impeach a senator? Why would the Senate ask the House to impeach a senator so they could try him? Why wouldn't they just remove him themselves? And vice versa. Why would the House impeach a a House member and then ask the Senate to try that, they can just remove the House member themselves. The only advantage of having that person impeached is they can never again hold an office in the federal government, an office of trust or authority. So let me ask you, who sounds more like a boss to you? Now, technically, Congress is not the president's boss. Congress is not the court's boss, but they certainly wield a lot more power than either the executive branch or the judicial branch. And they are the ones that are responsible to us. We place them there. We're responsible for their condition. So the next time you have a complaint about powers that the executive or the judicial or even the legislative branch are executing, thank your fellow Americans. It's we, the American people, that let it happen. So let's look at myth number 2. How long is a federal judge's term? Give you just a second to think about that. How many of you said lifetime appointment? Guess what? The answer is you're wrong. Sorry. You see, Article 3, Section 1 says judges both of the Supreme and inferior courts shall hold their office during good behavior. It's a very important point. See, if you go back to Article 2, there are specific things that a president or federal officer can be impeached for. Treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. I have a whole article that talks about high crimes and misdemeanors and all that, but there's a list. A judge can be removed simply for bad behavior. Well, that brings up an interesting question. Who determines what good behavior is? Well, who determines it? Well, the answer? Congress. See, Article 2, Section 4, we said that the president and vice president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, and then goes into the impeachment process. It's also the process by which other federal officers are removed, including judges. The only difference is a judge doesn't need to be accused of a high crime or misdemeanor. They just had to be accused of bad behavior. So ultimately, it's the House that determines what behaviors are worthy of impeachment. Since the only punishment for impeachment is removal from office and banning from ever holding office again, the House determines what that level is, and then the Senate determines whether or not they judge both the law and the facts of the case. Meaning, did the House make their case in the impeachment that the judge behaved badly? And is their definition of bad sufficient to warrant removal? So ultimately, it's Congress that determines what is good behavior for a judge and what behavior they should be removed for. Personally, I wish Congress took that power a lot more seriously, but we have what we have because that's what we let happen. Okay, so that's myth number 1 and 2. Let's look at myth number 3. And I'll tell you what, myth number 3 can get a lot of people's dander up. I get a lot of looks when I first bring this one up. So let me ask you a question. Did you vote for president in 2016? I don't care who you voted for. I really don't care. The question is, did you vote for president in 2016? And the answer is technically no. And this is a very important point. See, technically, you voted for electors to choose the president and vice president. Now, this is a screen capture of, I believe it's the Missouri sample ballot for 2016. And I use it because it's the easiest example. It says right there, presidential electors for. Now, most states kind of bury that elector language in really fine print, but here it's right there. You can see it. Now, what's interesting is most states have laws requiring electors to pledge who they will vote for. That's why you're voting for electors for Hillary Clinton or electors for Donald Trump. See, that's a state requirement. The state establishes what they call pledged electors. that the electors pledge to vote for a certain person, and then you're not actually, you're voting for an anonymous person who's pledged to vote a certain way, rather than voting for somebody who can make a rational decision about who we should appoint for president. See, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 says, each state shall appoint, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. See, the plan was for states to choose people who would represent them in the presidential election, not for the people to choose a president. I've gone through the congressional debates, the convention debates, as they decided how are they going to choose a president. I actually have I've got a link to it. There's a whole article where I go into this in much more detail. And it's a very interesting discussion. First they wanted Congress to do it. Then they said, no, that's not a good idea. Then they said, well, all right, we'll have the states do it. What they thought would happen is that they wanted the states to do it based on congressional district. They wanted the district to vote for someone who would then go to the state capitol and discuss, debate, and vote. Yeah, not the way it happened. But why is it important to understand it's the states that choose the president, not the people? It's an important point, and I've had this discussion a lot recently, but why is that important? Well, let's look at the job of the president. What does the Constitution expect of the President of the United States? Well, he or she is to execute the laws of the nation, federal laws, United States laws. Right? That's job number one. And they are to represent the Union in foreign affairs. Now, they do this militarily as commander-in-chief, and they do it diplomatically through appointing ambassadors, signing treaties, receiving ambassadors. But that's the job's focus. You see, the president is supposed to be a representative of the Union of States, not of the people. This idea of the president, being a representative of the people, there to help the people, is something that's developed over time as people, I think some knowingly, some unknowingly, have morphed the role of president into something more akin to a monarch, a king, giving him more, he or eventually she, more and more problems. Now you may say, why is this so important? Why are these myths, especially the last one, why is it so important to recognize them? Because bad information leads to bad decisions. I spent 30 years in the IT industry, and we have this idea called garbage in, garbage out. If you put bad information into a system, you're going to get bad information out. And I want to give you some examples. And I'm going to pick on this vote for president because everyone's talking about the 2020 election. So it's going to be top of mind. Right? First, there is no popular vote for president. As I've already shown you, when you go to the ballot, you're voting for electors for president. The state chooses those electors. They've decided to do it by popular vote. I have no problem with that. I don't like the way they assign them, and we can talk about that at another time. But the people do not directly vote for president. This idea of a popular vote for president is made up by the media and by pundits. The media so they can have a story. Oh, we've got the national poll of, we've already got people polling. We've already got people with national polls about, Democrats, how they would do against Trump, and which is ridiculous because there is no national vote for president. And pundits use it as a reason to complain about elections. I've had myriad discussions. I was just having one last week with someone who's complaining all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, George W. Bush. Well, they didn't really win the election because they lost a popular vote. Except there is no popular vote. And there's a whole lot of things, of examples of analogies I can use to show how that's wrong. But the problem is, we've bought into this idea. We've been told over and over again that it's basically a popular vote for president. And this archaic, electoral college is something made up by old folk because of some silly reason. See, the problem is this is more from just a benign whining to really a serious threat to the republic. There is a national popular vote movement, an agreement among the states to elect a president by national popular vote. Now, there's a couple issues. On the face of it, a state deciding to appoint its electors based on a national popular vote is technically constitutional. It does meet the letter of the law. It really misses the spirit of the law, and since it's an agreement among the states, in order for it to be constitutional, it requires approval by Congress. Oh well. But it's even worse than that. See, now you're going to have states that ignore the will of the people of their own state. What happens when people in California that find out that after they voted 70, 80, 90% Democratic, their electors went for the Republican because the Republican won the national vote? Or vice versa. Take Texas. They voted Republican, but hey, the Democrat got a mythical national popular vote. They're ignoring the will of the people of their own state in order to promote some sort of national agenda. It centralizes power, something I really don't like. And it centralizes it in large cities. They will have much more influence, and they will disenfranchise many Americans. And it has to do with demographics. And I have an article I linked to that describes this, but it deals a lot with the Democratic and the idea that large states that have relatively small populations now have no say effectively in selecting the president. And it's funny because some of the people that are pushing the national popular vote complain that a handful of battleground states make the decision. So you're going to make it a handful of battleground cities? Does that make it better? It's also going to centralize power in Washington because it's going to further diminish the role and the powers of the states. The states will become less and less sovereign, and more power will be centralized in Washington. As why should someone pay attention to Iowa? Okay, yeah, they've got a primary. After the primary, who cares? Because the president's going to spend their time in the Rust Belt, in the large urban areas, which again leads us to a further division amongst this nation. It's going to divide us amongst urban and rural populations. It's going to divide us between more traditional and more progressive groups because of the fact that people in urban areas tend to vote much more progressive. I should call it regressive, but they term themselves progressives, whereas much of the rest of the country votes much more traditional. See, the other thing about the national popular vote is it changes us from a union of 50 sovereign states on the presidential level into a democracy. You see, we created 50, originally 13, now 50 sovereign states, and they had power and they had influence. And now they want to ignore the will of the states and focus simply on the people as a homogenous group. Well, guess what? I live in Tennessee now. My people down here think a lot differently than when I used to live in New York. And in fact, democracy is something that was greatly feared by our founders. Read some of their works. Madison said, democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. There's a reason why democracy was shunned, because I've heard democracy described as two wolves and a sheep voting as to who to have for supper. If your right is dependent on a majority of the people being willing to support it, what happens when a majority of people say, no, freedom of speech doesn't mean that anymore? Your freedom of religion doesn't matter anymore. Your freedom of the press, your freedom from unwarranted search and seizures, because 50% plus one vote against it. Now, this doesn't turn us into a pure democracy, but it's another step in the now century-long move from a union of 50 states, actually almost a century and a half now, from a union of 50 states into a homogeneous democracy. And here are some links to, the layout came all fine. I can post these links in the notes. But where I talk about the Electoral College and why we have it. And it's not exactly what most of us have been told. The other move is there's a House Joint Resolution to propose an amendment to the Constitution to abolish the Electoral College. Now, I believe it's Representative Cohen out of Memphis, Tennessee. I believe he's the one that's doing it. I give him credit. He is following the letter of the Constitution and the spirit. If we're going to get rid of the Electoral College, not just, well, we'll make it effectively useless, we're actually going to abolish it. There's just one problem. He misrepresents why we have an Electoral College. He misrepresents how the founders wanted the president elected. It distorts the entire structure of our nation. And there's a link to an article I did where I go into that as well. I'll put that in the show notes. So why is this important? See, it's important for us to recognize that not everything you have been taught is true. It's a sad state of affairs, but that's the way it is. We cannot trust what politicians or pundits say. That should be pretty obvious. But we cannot trust what judges and lawyers say. If you follow me on the Constitution study, you see I do a lot of review of Supreme Court cases, both oral arguments and their opinions. And I am dumbfounded sometimes by 9 of what are supposedly the smartest legal minds in the nation who cannot read basic English. It's amazing. Speaking of basic English, we cannot trust what textbooks say. Many of the textbooks I've read, they state things that are just plain, they're just wrong. It's amazingly wrong. Because they say things like 3 co-equal branches of government and judges with lifetime appointments. They also misrepresent things like Marbury versus Madison. It's amazing to see just how wrong these textbooks often are. And in fact, you can't even trust what so-called constitutional scholars say. I remember everyone said, oh, well, President Obama, he was a constitutional law professor. Yeah, but he couldn't find the Constitution with both hands in a map. I've talked to lawyers. Lawyers aren't taught the Constitution. They're taught constitutional law, which is what someone said about the Constitution. And it's amazing some of the stuff they come up with. And then you go to the Constitution itself, and it's not even close. It's not a, well, you sort of cut a kind of. No, it's the exact opposite. In fact, I don't even want you to trust what I say. That's why I give you all of the references. I give you all of the quotations and links because I want you to verify for yourself. See, if you trust me, what happens when I get it wrong? Right? I want you to verify everything for yourself. And that's what the references are all there for. So the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize that we have a problem. Step number 1 is recognize, we have a problem. We cannot depend on government to teach us or our children about the nation that we have inherited. It's a sad state of affairs, but that's it. Right? Our own recent history has shown that our educational system is an abject failure in that department. Look at the example of 4 out of 10 people surveyed can't name a single freedom protected by the First Amendment, and 75% can't name more than one. Our public education system is geared toward creating a subservient populace, not one educated in civics. And this is not simply an opinion. Look at look at the quality of civics education that's coming out. Now, another organization I deal with is called Be a Berean Network. And it gets to that second point of once you know you've got a problem, then you have to do something about it. And the reason I like the quote from Acts chapter 17 is it said the Bereans were more fair-minded, more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the words with all readiness and searched the scriptures daily to find out whether these things were true. My question is, why don't we do the same thing with the Constitution? Why don't we listen to what others have to say? Listen to their opinions. Listen to their points of view. Give them the decency and the respect to listen to what they have to say. And then go back to the Constitution to see whether what they say is true. Now, again, if you follow the Constitution study, you know I'm very picky about words. So when someone says the Constitution says this, I want to go back and where does it actually say that? What are those words and what do they mean? Now, I can tell you it does take time, but it does get easier with time. It also is a good point because it helps us reinforce the need to protect not only our rights, but the rights of others. And that's a really important point. As you begin listening to other people's points of view, giving them the authority, letting them exercise their right to free speech and free press, and then dealing with their arguments, you're helping to protect their rights as well. And that's a good pattern to get into. Yes, things look bad, right? Our nation and its governments, and I mean plural, they're a mess. Federal, state, local, county. Our liberties are in real trouble. They're being infringed every day, and it seems almost every day someone's coming up with a new way to infringe on our rights, and it really seems only the inertia of history that provides some veil of protection for these rights that we so cherish. It'll take work if we want to fix it. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. We've inherited a land that's a mess, and we've made it worse. It's going to take work. And to be honest, I don't care whether you support term limits, a balanced budget amendment, a convention of the states. These problems are symptoms of a much greater plague on our nation. And that is the ignorance of the supreme law of the land. See, if we recognize we have a problem and we're ready to act, what is the solution? Yeah. I don't think we should just be tinkering around with government. In fact, I don't want to look to government for a solution. I don't think government is the answer. Government, I think, is the problem. When I was after this particular session at the conference, I was talking with people afterwards, and one person said, I should run for office. Government's not the problem. Now, beyond the fact that I'm not willing to compromise my morals in order to get elected. I'm not willing to compromise my standards to get elected. I certainly would be a thorn in the side of any existing power structure. So I'd be basically put aside and marginalized as much as possible. I really don't think the idea of having people that want to be elected to office are the people that really should be in office, especially at the state level and especially in the House. I think we need people whose character says they should be there even though they don't really want to. No, I think what's really going to take is, rather than tinkering around with the government, we need an informed electorate. It's going to take citizens who know the Constitution, who know what their rights are, and are prepared to defend them. It's going to take citizens that are willing to hold their elected representatives accountable to their oath to support the Constitution. That's where I think it is. It's not in government, not in any capital, but with the people, with we the people. You see, when this nation was founded, we had these beautiful words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. I think we've lost the beauty of these words. These are beautiful words. The idea that there are certain rights that they didn't come from government. They cannot be touched by government. We're going to create a government that secures your rights. Doesn't dictate them to you. It protects them. Imagine what life in America would be like if the government spent more time protecting our rights rather than enforcing a power over us. We've lost a lot of the meaning of these words. I don't think they're taught, and when they are taught, I don't think they're taught in their full scope. I think we're given a two-dimensional view of these, and when we start studying and understanding them, it changes how you look at least for me, how I look at government and those there. And I'm reminded of a story from the Battle of Lexington. See, when the British marched on Lexington Green, they were met there by the Massachusetts militia. And the British commander ordered the militia to drop their weapons and disperse. And it was reported by those who in the militia that their commander, one John Parker, said, "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have war, let it begin here." I think we need that attitude. We need to stand our ground. We are not going to give up any more of our rights. We're not going to let any more of our rights be infringed upon. We aren't going to fire unless we're fired upon. We are not going to initiate violence, but we will defend ourselves. Because if they mean to come after us, let it begin here. I want to fight that fight rather than my daughter and my grandchildren fighting that fight. So now that you've learned about these myths, now that you have a better idea that maybe everything you've been taught isn't true, I'm going to have a call to action. The core need, the core ask that I want to have of each and every one of you, that is that you study the Constitution for yourself. I think John Jay said it best. Every member of the state ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they are violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. We need to read and study the Constitution and teach our children to be free. See, by delegating that responsibility to the government, we've raised generations of constitutionally illiterate citizens. They have no clue as to what the Constitution says or how the federal government is supposed to work. Generations who do not understand their rights or their responsibilities. Adults who have never understood the saying, "I may vehemently disagree with what you have to say, but will defend to the death your right to say it." Vast groups of people who, if they don't win, simply find a way to change the rules in their favor. So I'd ask, join a Constitution study group. And if there isn't one area, consider starting one of your own. There are many groups that'll help you. You can find more information on the website or through the Facebook links. There's actually a group called Restore the Intent. Their goal is to have a Constitution study group in every county in the nation. They will help you find one. And if you want to start one, they'll help you start one. Then once you've learned about the Constitution, vote the Constitution, not your pocketbook. I know it's hard. I know people come in and offer you, we're gonna lower this tax or we're gonna increase this subsidy, and it's our nature to want that. But that's very short-sighted, because the country, the nation that makes that all possible will fall apart. See, we need to hold our elected representatives accountable. We need to remember they work for us, not the other way around. I'd love to have the opportunity, actually I'm kind of scared, but I'd love to have the opportunity to remind a few of our elected representatives. They work for us, not the other way around. We need to hold them accountable, because whatever they do is a representation of us. So when you see Congress with a 10, 15% approval rating, that's a representation of the American people, because we voted them in. When you see crooked and corrupt and illegal things going on in Congress, remember, we put them there. And when you see Congress not doing their job, remember, we hired them. And we can fire them if we'll just do it. You know, our founding fathers once said, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I believe it's time once again for Americans to remind that those in power, we are independent. The sovereign nations, we the people. We must once again pledge our lives to this idea that we, the people, created the federal government. It is our creation through the states. It's time we took responsibility for those actions. Pledge your life to that work. Okay, yes, I'm not going to get the benefit. I'm not going to get the tax cut. Maybe I don't get the subsidy. Are you willing to pledge your fortune to having a free nation for your children? Are you willing to pledge your honor that you will do what is constitutionally right, even though it may not benefit you directly or immediately? Because if we don't, one day our children may curse us for our lack of fortitude to stand up to protect the rights that we inherited, to squander them away before they've had a chance to exercise them. So with that, okay, let's shut this down. Let's see what we get here. I am not seeing any comments. I'm not seeing any comments. I'm not seeing any questions. I see some likes here. Let's see here. There we are. I found the comments. Why won't Facebook show me the stupid comments? Hang on just a second here. I don't know why. I've got a bunch of comments here. Let's try this. It's one problem I have. I've been working with this. I keep trying to do test runs, and it never seems to work the same way when I'm live as when I'm doing my tests. So let me see if I can find my comments here. Facebook is being just a little bit slow. Ooh, I got lots of comments. There we go. Now. Except it's not showing me all of the comments. You know what? Hang on a second. Let me see if I can find it over here. You know, I really am sorry because every time I test this, I can click a link and it shows me. There we go. No, it still won't show me all the comments. It only shows me the most recent comments. All right, let me see if I can find it over here. I see lots of comments. I really want to get to these comments because there's a bunch of them. And I want to see these comments, and it won't. It's only showing me the latest comments. There are some of us. Samuel says there are some of us who know more than think. I'm glad to hear that. I know I'm not the only one out here, and you know it's glad to bump into people that know, because so often I bump into people that just they don't know. You know what? Sometimes Facebook drives me nuts. As much as I love Facebook, why will it not show me? Hang on a second. I'm looking here. Yeah, hello, Everett Greer. I'm glad you see here. I am, you know what I'll do is I will answer as many of the comments as questions in the comments, because it doesn't seem to show me anything but the latest comments until after I end the stream. And I know there's other software that I can use right when I do interviews that keeps track of them, but for some reason Facebook won't show me all the stupid comments until after I end the stream, which really just it's frustrating. Maybe I'll end up going to another platform. Who knows? So I apologize if you've asked a question. Throw it again in the comments. Let me take a look at it, and I'll try to answer that in the time we have left. We've got about 10 minutes left before I want to give everybody their time back. This is infuriatingly. It drives me nuts. I tested this the other day, and it looked just fine. And then as soon as I go into the live stream, it stops updating and only shows me the last few comments. I apologize. I really do want to get this worked out. I do want to be able to answer questions live. I may consider switching to another platform if I can. If anybody knows Facebook and can tell me how I can get all of my comments to display while I'm still broadcasting live, I would be very, very grateful, because every time I do this, it says I've got 42 comments, which is great. I love it. I want to answer them, but it'll only show me the last 4, which to me is stupid. Let's see. Dustin does say the entire goal in a democracy is to be the majority by any means necessary, and to maintain that majority status as long as possible. That's why democracies are violent and why they always shut down free speech. I don't know if that's necessarily the goal of a democracy. It is one of the effects of a democracy, because there will always be people who want power. There will always be people who think they know better than you do and wish the power to do that. What's interesting is, if you look today, it isn't even a majority anymore. It's gotten to the point where if you just can get enough people riled up to get some attention, that's all it takes. It's from what I've understand from statistics, many of the more say interesting recent changes are not driven by majorities of people. They're small percentage of people. The percentage of homosexuals are extremely small. The percentage of homosexuals that want to get married was extremely small. The percentage of transgenders have been extremely small. But look at the power they wield. And yes, they want to use it to shut up opposition because, well, it's easier that way. But it's, I don't know. It's, I guess it's a bit of a sad state of affairs that is where we stand now. So I'm not seeing any new comments pop into the list. I really wish I understood what Facebook was doing here. I really wish, because I would love to show all of these questions and hang on. There may be a way of doing this. Where am I here? How did I get there? If I just figured this out, I will be eternally grateful. Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know if it's all of them, but I got a bunch of them. I think I found it finally. Yay. Okay. Let's see what I can do here. Actually, can I get this? Hang on. I've got a feedback loop I need to get rid of. Okay. So let's see. It doesn't allow me to sort them in any logical order, so that would make sense. All right. Let's see. Cultural issue. There's Dustin's. Population cities will rule everything. Yeah, I was having a long discussion on Facebook with a gentleman about the national popular vote. And it does. It centralizes power in the cities, especially when you consider, if you take the cities and their surrounding areas, I've heard statistics as few as 20 to 25 of the largest cities would have enough influence to change the election, possibly to control the election. And again, it's the issue is there's a reason why we don't have a popular vote. We have a state vote. And I've read through, at least while I've found of the debates, and it's a discussion of how the states will vote. You know, it's I really seriously am concerned of what happens to the presidency and the nation if the national popular vote moves forward, because I see not only, the 17th Amendment really destroyed a lot of the balance between the states and the feds. This would make it even worse, and sadly, I think it'd be more opportunities for unrest, for protests, and just more polarization, more problems. Yeah, one person said, I think it was Guyver said 10 states would run the country. It wouldn't even be states. It would be cities, because states don't matter. If you get rid of if you have a national popular votes, states don't matter in presidential election anymore. And we've invested so much power. Congress has illegally invested so much power in the presidency. Yeah, it's really scary. Okay, let's see. This looks to be a discussion about people working in Congress. Should there be term limits for all of them? Angelo asks. I actually have an interesting discussion. I actually did a session, I don't know if it's been posted yet, about term limits, where I actually do a ponder this about term limits. Here's my short version on term limits. Term limits are a symptom. They're not the problem. Because there's nobody that doesn't stand for election at least once every 6 years. And the reason people are in Congress that long is because people keep voting for them. Now, when FDR won 4 elections, it was the Republicans that wanted term limits because they couldn't beat FDR. So to me, term limits aren't going to fix the problem. They're not going to eliminate the problem. It's one of the symptoms of an American populace that doesn't hold their elected officials accountable. Term limits are a group of people telling other group of people, you're not smart enough to vote properly. We need to put restrictions on you. And that always I find to be a bit dangerous. Interesting discussion looks about House and voting. And, it looks like, and Angelo, the big thing is the people are supposed to be watching Congress. We are the ones that hold the House of Representatives responsible, and now we hold the Senate responsible too. It's ultimately we the people. The problem is we have been taught so little about the Constitution, and so much of what we have been taught is wrong, that the people don't think they even have a voice anymore. It's interesting because, there's actually 2 groups. So the people hold the House responsible. The states really should be holding the Senate accountable. That got changed with the 17th Amendment. But the states are supposed to be balancing out. They're supposed to protect us from an overbearing federal government. So if we were to vote in the next election based on a person's record of protecting our rights, of upholding their oath to support the Constitution based on what it actually says, not what some law professor or some Supreme Court, trust me, the Supreme Court, the drivel they put out about the Constitution is disgusting. My daughter could out Constitution most of the Supreme Court opinions I've read when she was 12 years old. It's sad, right? But the idea that the states are to protect us from the federal government and that we are to hold those people responsible, that's our job. And yes, that may mean not waiting until the first week in November to decide who to vote for. That means getting involved before the primaries. It means meeting with your House representative. It means knowing them and challenging them on the votes they take, the positions they hold. And again, if we followed the Constitution, it'd be a lot easier because there'd be a lot more representatives, but that's a discussion for another day. Yeah, teaching in our schools, it's, it really is, there's a reason why the Constitution study has been focusing a lot more on homeschool groups. I live in the Middle Tennessee area, and I'm engaging with several of the homeschool groups, going to a couple of homeschool events, because I think homeschoolers are more open to learning about what the Constitution actually says. And I think that's an important point. And I'm sitting here looking, let me do this so you can see a little bit more of me. Hey! Okay, I'm sorry I wasted so much time trying to get the comments up and running. I'm glad I finally figured out what I was doing wrong. So hopefully next time I can make that work, and I'll try very hard for next time. Next month, I'm planning on doing a session called What is a Right? Where I actually go through and break down the definition of rights and their application and how we should treat them. So hopefully you'll join me next month for that. Again, put in more comments, questions, head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. I am always looking for questions. I am looking for opportunities to talk to people, to talk to groups. I got invited to a group at a local college campus a couple weeks ago. Had a great time. We had a wonderful time discussing the Constitution and the role that these young adults will be expected to have as they assume the mantle of full citizenship and being responsible citizens. I am still working on the book. I'm trying to get the book ready for editing. My goal is still to have the book out by the end of the year. I'm trying to get a publisher to publish it, but I may end up doing it self-published. But the book should be available soon, and I'm also working on the online publications. If you head over to the website, you can sign up for the mailing list. I basically send out about one email a month, just giving you an update of what's been going on and giving you opportunities to where we can meet and talk and discuss. I know I'm running a little long. I hope you'll forgive me. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it made you think. Even if you don't agree with everything that I said, I hope it made you think, and I hope it makes you go back to the Constitution and see if what I said was so. And if you want to ask more questions, if you have other topics you want me to cover, other things you'd like to learn more about, please let me know. I'm always looking for fodder for articles and podcasts and videos. And, this is my life now. This is what I'm doing, trying to make a career out of this. And I'm having a great time, and I love sharing, and I love the people who are coming and joining with me. I hope you'll join me the next time on the Constitution Study Live, and I hope you'll follow me on the website. Most of all, have a great day. Have a wonderful time with your families or your friends or whoever you spend time with, and consider seriously joining a Constitution study or starting one of your own. And please contact me if you'd like some advice or some help. Great, thank you, and have a wonderful night.